And we're also really pleased to welcome Beverly Harden, who is our National AHP lead, and Mark Radford, HE Chief Nurse, this afternoon, who will be talking after me. So just a couple of points I want to make. Obviously, with workforce vacancies, shortage of workforce, and the increasing numbers that are coming into the workforce, clinical placement expansion is absolutely key, to the qualification of confident healthcare professionals. This is a really high profile work stream for us, and our desire in the Midlands, I think, is to create a real community and a partnership with the universities and with trusts and the system, because no one of those three parts can do it on their own. So that partnership is absolutely crucial. And I think we also need to recognise COVID. For all of the horrible parts of COVID, it has presented some opportunities, simulation, and forcing us to look at new perspectives. So I think this ties into that as well. And before I hand over to Beverly, just very quickly, the aims of the workshop this afternoon, as I said, this community of practice, almost just sharing best ideas, what works, what can people update us on. The quality of the clinical placements is obviously crucial to us, particularly at HEE, so driving up that quality agenda, and just really that sense of what can we try, what can we do that's different, what can we pick up on that others are trying that we perhaps haven't tried yet, and then working those across the region and by the 11 systems, because I think it's only by seeing it at that level that we're really going to crack this issue. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of an introduction, but you're all very welcome. And I'm now going to hand over to Beverly Harden, the National AHP lead for HEE. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So welcome, colleagues. You have Mark Radford and myself here this afternoon to welcome you to what will be a great afternoon's worth of conversation. This is incredibly challenging work. We are tired. We are hopeful, and we have got still a lot to do. But when you think how far we have come, the fact that we have continued to train people through a pandemic, the fact that we are graduating students and that we are welcoming them into our workforce is an incredible, incredible achievement. And I know we know that, but we absolutely have to pause to reflect on the fact that we have achieved amazing things. And I think what's been most amazing has been the continued innovation, the courage, the creativity that we have seen across all of England, driving clinical placement, change, improvement, and really seeking how do we grow our workforce, how do we absolutely innovate and meet the needs of people during a pandemic, but actually also really drive up quality and drive different ways of operating that enables us to address what that 21st century clinician needs to be and needs to look like. So how through our placements do we achieve absolutely excellent clinical skills, but also how do we really start to socialise people into the art of effective leadership, research and quality improvement and education, and really starting to think differently. And I'll pop in the chat box some of the work that we've done over the pandemic from an allied health professions perspective, looking at how we drive change and how we think differently about it. And some things will survive beyond the pandemic because they are fantastic, and some things will need to continue to morph and change. But by doing that together and really driving that innovation together, we've got the opportunity to absolutely drive that 21st century clinician that, let's face it, will be looking after us and our dotage. So we have every piece of selfish requirement we need to invest well in this workforce. So I think the real magic of today is the time spent in conversation, the time spent in thinking through the different ways that we could do this, but also, as I say, learning from each other. And I think hearing absolutely what it feels like for our students and our educators, and the fact that we have got so many challenges. We have the challenge of working in community where we're travelling in cars together. We've got the challenge of working in the CT scanner where actually there's not enough room to swing a cat, let alone have 3 students and others who are learning. But also from an allied health professions perspective, we have the real challenge of we grow the profession, we are recovering our student placements, but at the same time, we're also trying to optimise return to practice. We're looking at international recruits and we're looking at our support workforce. Exactly the same challenge that our nursing colleagues have, our midwifery colleagues have. And then you put all of those students in one big hothouse and we try and train together. And you wonder at what point the ward pops because there are just so many people in that environment, all striving to learn together alongside the MDT. So real call to action for us of thinking really creatively about how do we then also really start to think about MDT learning together, really working in the sim suite together, in clinical practice together, and thinking differently. And the last thing I'll say before Mark takes over is, for us, it's the real challenge we face currently is our paramedic workforce, for whom it's been a real challenge keeping placements going. And actually, the other issue for us from a paramedic perspective is when you think about what the 21st century paramedic is doing, they're working in the ambulance service, they're working in primary care, they're working in the emergency department, they're working in a variety of different environments. We need to be training them in a variety of different environments. So when you think about the multi-professional opportunities for clinical placements, the paramedic becomes one great example of how I think as a system we can think fundamentally differently about how we think about multi-professional learning, creating a brilliant paramedic, but also the ability to work in new environments and to be embedded within teams, working together, learning together, driving improvement of care for people together. So thank you for your hard work. Incredibly innovative and exciting time. I'll pop the bits in the chat box for you. And I think you've got Helen Marriott working incredibly hard in your patch, who is absolutely poised there to support and enable a lot of this work to happen. And for us, it's about working in that tripartite relationship to support our learners to thrive. So have a great day. Thank you for your time. We'll talk again in the questions in a minute. Over to you, Professor Radford.
Bev, thanks so much. Right up front, my name is Mark Radford. I'm the Chief Nurse Health Education England and Deputy CNO, and I have lived and worked in the West Midlands and the Midlands all of my career, and I just know the fantastic organisations and institutions supporting education and training of all of our healthcare workers. So it's really great that we've got this opportunity today to look at some real positives, but also importantly to reflect on some of the significant challenges we've got and how do we work as a partnership together. But first of all, I want to echo what Bev has said and just say a personal thank you to all of you, because this pandemic has been staggering in terms of the impact it's had on health services, on the education sector, our students, and also, sadly, the significant loss of life we've seen in our communities up and down the countries. And I know that people on today will have been affected by that. And it is really important to reflect that everybody in the system has worked hard on a common purpose to support as much as we possibly can the health and social care system's response in relation to the pandemic. And that is, of course, when you look at the media, we often see about our clinicians who are working at the point of care, but actually my experiences over these last 18 months is how well our universities, our education and training institutes, our placement providers across all sectors have really done monumentally huge work in support of learners, being part of the response in relation to the pandemic, but also importantly in support of those students and learners as they go through their programs. So it's been a hugely challenging time, but I've been immensely impressed by our students and our learners through this last 18 months. And just to put that into context, I met a group of second year students very recently, and of course for them, you know, they know nothing other than working and learning in a pandemic. In fact, they only had 3 months of their program starting before the pandemic really started to bite in our country, and they've known it all the way through the majority of their training. So it's really important to understand that the disruption that the pandemic has had on their learning and their experiences, and also importantly around their mental health, is significant. And I'd just like to commend both our universities and our higher education and FE college providers, because I know that the academic staff have either personally participated in the pandemic response. I know lots of clinicians from those organisations have worked in different parts of our health service. But also I know that they've been supporting students and learners, as well as also moving to an online environment, changing curricula and courses, and having to revise programmes at the drop of a hat. So I completely appreciate that the expertise and the approach that the learning institutions have taken in relation to this. But we're very much now in a recovery phase in relation to how do we reorganise and right-size our education and training pipeline. And it's really important to say that, because whilst we're still in the grip of the pandemic, and whilst I see a great response in relation to the numbers coming down, and I also see the results of the vaccination programme coming, we will still be dealing with the legacy of the pandemic for many months, if not years ahead, in relation to the unmet needs of our population who will need to be supported and treated. So the future of workforce for the NHS and social care is never more critical than it is now. And so our focus as an organisation working with government and with many higher education institutes, as well as also professional colleagues, is to absolutely ensure that we deliver and still maintain high volume and high quality education and provision and support of those students currently going through programme. Now, I know certainly from a nursing and midwifery perspective, this has been hugely challenging. We've had a number of paid placement opportunities, we've had programme pauses, and that I know has been a challenge for the students, but also importantly for the service. And I'm just hugely pleased and proud with the way everybody has worked together to support students during the most recent phase. And the majority of students will be returning to their studies. But just to give you some statistics and stats, is that actually during this second phase, we had still with our second year students, well over 95% of our students still maintained their supernumerary training programs, which I think is amazing and down to the great work of practice educators and the universities. And a similar level of about 92% of our first years, and a mixed economy with our third year students, where around about a third went into paid placements, but other colleagues went into a mix of placements. So coming out of this second phase, we are in better shape because of your work with the number of students that we have nationally that have delays to their programme. And of course, we do have delayed students, but the time that they are delayed has been mitigated by the work that you've done. And some of that has been driven by the innovation that Tom and Bev have talked about, which is in relation to really expanding and developing things like simulation. And we've had support from Nursing Midwifery Council and HCPC and others in relation to doing that. Obviously, we recently launched a funding strategy of £15 million into our universities to support simulation expansion this year, and we'll consider further investment over the next year as well to be able to do that. But of course, we're also taking on board lots of feedback during the pandemic about, as Bev rightly pointed out, things that we need to keep and do. And as you know, the Nursing Midwifery Council is currently consulting on issues such as the European legislation in terms of the practice hours, the role of simulation and how much that may participate as a role to the courses. So where we see innovations that deliver high quality outcomes and support for our students to ensure that we have, as a health service and a social care sector, have the right graduates and other healthcare professionals joining and support of the service over the next few years, we will continue to invest as Health Education England in areas where we believe it's going to make the most impact in support of these sorts of aims. And of course, placements are those areas as well. And of course, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've made significant investments in additional funding at both provider level and at system level in relation to placement capacity. We'll be conducting similar strategies this year. Delighted to say that we've seen a very, very strong response in relation to applications to our university programmes. Just to give you some headline stats, last year, the UCAS cycle at the end of January generated an additional 16% of applications to nursing midwifery courses. By the end of that year, through clearing and your good work around places and placements, that boosted to a 27% increase in the number of student nurses and midwives who started on their programmes through September and January. And what is really important to say is that this year we've seen one of the biggest increases in years in relation to our postgraduate programmes, which is really positive to see. So we've seen a north of 40% increase in the number of students applying to postgraduate programmes across lots of professions, which is really, really encouraging. And you will have seen the headlines from UCAS at the recent cycle, which is that we have seen a 34% increase in applications to higher education institutes this year. And of course, we are starting to work up both with government, Department of Education, and now importantly through engagement events like this, in gearing up. How do we ensure that we make sure that we have enough and sufficient placements to support a continued expansion? Because one of the things that's really important for me is that the solution to high quality healthcare is having great education and training opportunities, a strong pipeline of people who want to come into healthcare careers, importantly retention of both our student learners and also our core staff, but also innovating around the opportunities for different roles, and one which Health Education England has supported, such as the nursing associate, but others including assistant practitioners and other support roles that exist within allied health professions, notably in areas such as mental health as an example, which is an area, certainly from Health Education England's perspective, we've got a really strong focus on in terms of boosting further in learning disabilities and mental health programmes across the country. So it's great to have all of your brainpower here today, your thoughts, views, in relation to where we need to put our emphasis, resourcing and focus, but also importantly to help share in that ambition for us to be able to grow the future of the NHS and social care workforce to deliver the needs of the citizens over the next few years. And I'm positive. I think there is a lot that has been achieved despite some serious challenges over the last 18 months or so. But I'm cognizant of the fact that whilst there has been some really great work going forward, we still have a number of challenges to resolve around placement capacity, expansion into community and general practice, and importantly, social care, areas that I am really excited about seeing the breadth of placement opportunities for our healthcare practitioners, and not necessarily just within our acute setting, being parochial and within nursing. It's absolutely seeing the breadth of health and social care opportunities are really important. So I'm delighted to kind of be part of today. I know there's an opportunity for some questions to come in, and I'm happy to answer those as well as I can. We are in a pre-election period, of course, so Chatham House rules, so please don't put some of my answers out there on the internet. We're limited by those, so but I'm really happy to have an open dialogue about some of these questions, so thank you very much indeed. Over to, I think it's back to Tom or Jackie.
It's back to me, Mark. Thank you very much, and thank you, Bev. That was absolutely fantastic. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jackie Brocklehurst. I'm Deputy Head of Nursing and Midwifery for Health Education England across the Midlands, and this is our third events that we're having today, and I'm just clocking, we've got 150 people on the call now, which is absolutely fantastic, and it just shows you, the level of support that we've got across the Midlands in relation to clinical placement expansion, and we really are working together to make sure that we've got some great clinical placements for all of our students. And I know that universities and providers are working so hard to have innovative approaches to how we meet the needs of our services. So we've got an opportunity now to ask any questions to Mark, to Bev, or to Tom. I see Tom still on the call. So we've got an opportunity to ask questions. So if you want to pop them into the chat box, or if you want to ask a question, happy for you to put your hands up. If you want to introduce yourself then and ask your question, that would be lovely. Any question that's put into the chat box, if we don't get a chance to answer it, we'll absolutely make sure that we do respond to all of those questions in the chat box after the session today. So we've just got about 15-20 minutes. We have had some pre-submitted questions. If you remember, after the last event. Yes, the tricky one will go to Bev. After the last event, we did reach out to everybody and say, have you got any questions? Have you got anything that you would like to hear more about? And I've just collated a top few questions to ask. So I might kick off with those while we're giving you time to put your questions into the chat. So the first one is regarding place-based pilots and place-based tariff. And it was something that we heard a lot about before COVID, and we know that we were going to be one of the last regions to be taking part in that place-based tariff. But we just wondered, or we had a couple of questions actually. 2 people asked about it. Where are we with that? Is that still taking place, and you know, and how is that progressing? I don't know whether Mark or Bev, you know about that.
I can kick off, and then and perhaps Tom and Bev can come in. So
Yep.
I'm really excited about the opportunities around place-based placement opportunities, and the reason for this is because much of our healthcare and social care delivery is going to be much more dynamic over the next decade, if not now already, and actually trying to get our students exposed to greater opportunities of learning is going to involve a widening of areas that we need to go, because the diverse nature of some of the service delivery models. Mental health is a really good example, where we've got private independent voluntary organisations, we've got charity sectors, we've got others who are really helping us shape the delivery of services for mental health service users. And so we can't be wedded to structural models that just sit around an institution. So I'm really excited by some of the pilots we've seen, and some in other parts of the country, where they've actually taken placement organisation, resourcing and management on a system level. And just to give you an example about this, you know, what we've seen as an example is that some of our smaller social care providers, as an example, in one region, weren't big enough to take a student, because they didn't have all of the support mechanisms for the students. But actually grouping social care providers together meant that a peripatetic practice educator could then move between different organisations in support. Now, I know there are some examples like that in the Midlands, but these sorts of opportunities allow students to get a really rich training opportunity in places they wouldn't normally go, plus the supervision and also the aggregation of benefit. So, you know, we can open up the opportunities and we can ensure that resources get to the right places. Now, that doesn't mean that some of our big normal training providers won't be some of our big mainstays, but I think it really opens those opportunities in general practice, in community settings, in private providers, and other areas where our students really need to start to see. So some of the funding reform around that is still in play, and HE is taking forward with government, because actually there's some work we still need to do around tariff, there's some work we still need to do around funding flows, but actually I think getting the model right in terms of placement is the first key thing to do, whilst we get the other elements correct.
Lovely, thank you. Bev, Tom, do you want to add anything to that?
Bev, if I jump in, so specifically for the Midlands, I think we're quite right. COVID came along just as we were looking at being a pilot space for that, and I genuinely, the conversation has not come back again yet, but actually, as Mark says, there's even more reason to do it now going forward. So as we get to look at what the new world looks like, we'll see whether that comes back onto the front burner for us in the Midlands.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, shall I go over to Dominic now? He's got his hand up. Would you want to ask your question?
Afternoon, everyone. So I'm Don McCutcheon, and I'm the head of practice at the University of Wolverhampton. It was more a plea. I heard what you said, Mark, about particularly mental health. And I think one of our pleas, I think from a university perspective, is if there's further capacity expansion work, funding, I think, you know, mental health could really do with a focused look, because I know we had organisations within our region that have bid a couple of times, and because they're relatively small organisations, you know, I suppose them increasing by, say, 25 places was half their total capacity. Does that make sense? So in the future, if there's bids there, kind of a plea for next year, because mental health is one of the areas where, you know, we've got massively increasing applications, certainly as universities, really loads and loads of students that are interested in coming onto the programs, but a complete capacity logjam, really.
Yeah, great, Dominic. No, completely agree with you. And actually, mental health is a success story. So, so I'm really pleased to say, you know, this is publicly held data. But you know, last year we saw a significant expansion in mental health nursing. As an example, we went through from 5,009 acceptances last year to over 5,300. It's the largest branch growth we've seen, and a lot of that is down to our great universities and placement providers really opening up those opportunities to get those placement experiences right. So I agree, we've learned a lot. I like to see a lot of collaboration, so both in placement providers and also, I know this is tricky, I am an academic myself, but institutions as well, because actually sometimes hub and spoke type models between universities and placement providers in a system has really leveraged huge opportunity in terms of placement practice. But yeah, no, it's a great point, and this year I'd like to see that grow in a similar level, but I know that that's going to be really tough. Considering last year was a big ask, but actually, goodness me, we need more mental health nursing to come online. So well done to everybody for last year's growth, but let's see what we can do this year, and let's be precise about the funding. But my plea to you, let's get that collaboration working at institution level and at placement provider level, because I think that will help us.
Lovely, thank you. Bev, there's a question in the chat which is referring to community diagnostic hubs, and that they're being proposed as part of the Richards report, and how are they going to be staffed is the question. And I suppose this links to another question that I had earlier, which was around how do you grow AHP placements in clinical placement areas where they have to have specific equipment and things. So I don't know whether you want to take those questions together and value your thoughts on those.
Thanks, Jackie, delighted to. So the community diagnostic hubs have the opportunity to be a significant training venue as well as a significant throughput for people, but also the ability to train people in the real delivery of levels of care that relate to different levels of practice, pulling in the community, secondary care, and delivering some really innovative diagnostic models. And so the opportunity for us there is, and what our plea is into the people who are designing them currently, is that we build training and education thinking in from the beginning, but we also build in training and education space from the beginning to make sure that actually there is enough room that you can then have your learners, and you can have your support workers who are learning, you can have your advanced clinical practitioners and consultant practitioners who are learning, and people can all work together and deliver service, but actually work with learners as part of our wider team delivering that care and offering incredible place-based learning. So Jackie, it is the most fertile opportunity, I think, for diagnostic learning, but also when you think about the throughout the entire tiers of practice, but the ability for people to learn alongside the MDT, so the radiologist learning alongside others, is a hugely important part of this, but also in ophthalmology services and a number of other areas. But the real challenge around space limited, equipment limited placements is really being grappled with across the country, and some of the work that again is illustrated in the information I've put in the chat box. And it really for us is a combination of being really intelligent in the simulation that is offered pre-placement and around the edges of placement to take out of the clinical environment learning that can happen well. Many of our educational environments have got CT scanners or dummy CT scanners available that they can utilise for learning. So we've got a huge variety of simulated opportunity, but then also thinking again, as ever, 24/7 placements, 7-day-a-week placements, really building on the reality of working as a radiographer, for example, in this instance, but across the 24 hours a day piece, which we do keep forgetting about, but actually is an important part of socialising people into a profession as well. But also some really innovative models of multiple models of supervision, Jackie, and different ways of working, all of which, if people sign up to the learning hub that David has put together, all of which will be brought through as the learning evolves. And a beautiful example of the Christie Hospital in Manchester with their proton beam work that they're doing at the moment is taking multi-professional placements, combination of virtual and present, but that's offering for us every second year radiotherapy student across the country opportunity to engage in proton beam, and then a percentage of those to go through actual placements, which they would never normally have had access to, but by using a really creative hybrid model of accessing placement learning, Jackie. So it's, again, creativity in lots of different directions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bev. That's really helpful. Another question, I think this is probably for Mark. It's from Sean Thomas, and it's regarding the SSSA standards. And it's around, have we completed any work on auditing the practice assessors, practice supervisors' knowledge around the SSSA standards? And I think I know where Sean's coming from. You know, there's some great opportunities, isn't there, with those not so new SSSA standards now, and we still do hear some myths within the services around how many students you can have and who can have students, and I suppose it's a good question. You know, I'm not sure that we've necessarily done any auditing, but I think we are quite mindful that there is still maybe a lack of the art of possible with those SSSA standards.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, it's a really good point. And one of the things about the SSSA standards is the introduction of kind of flexibility and opportunities for widening both learning opportunities and also the kind of multi-professional aspects of how we go about that. Of course, and I say this, you know, we know that we can sometimes have very traditional approaches in how we approach assessment and supervision of students, and sometimes it doesn't keep pace with some of the policy developments that we are starting to see implemented across the system. So it is really, really important that we look to develop and make sure that they are truly embedded across the whole professional team in terms of the support of education and training, and that's going to be really quite critical. Have we done an audit on doing that? No, not a national one. It's something that would be useful to consider.
Lovely. I'm going to go back to the questions that we had submitted prior to the event, and Tom might be able to answer this. And there was some concerns that have been raised around staff burnout and staff well-being, and the fact that then we're sort of requesting more and more clinical placements from those areas as well. And how are we supporting the current workforce in relation to, you know, they're just coming out the other side of this this global pandemic? How are we supporting them in their day-to-day work?
Okay, so I mean, as colleagues on the call know, NHS England, NHS Improvement are doing a massive amount of work around health and well-being in the here and now, and we support that, be it through the local people boards and our connections with E&I. So I think there's that piece as well. And our job in HE is to complement that, but also to feed education and training into the recovery piece and the health and well-being. That, you know, that is such a vital piece of how we get people back on their feet, how we get the systems back on their feet. So I cannot profess to know the answer to that question. It is a really difficult one, and I think it's one of the heads of the question that we need to have in the clinical placement expansion piece is, you know, none of this is happening in a normal world. That whole health and well-being piece and people being burnt out and tired beyond belief is another thing we have to factor in to try and come up with the solutions. So I don't think any one of us has the exact answer to that, but that's where the regional focus is so important, because we will know what's happening within our own regions rather than trying to push a national response or template for that. I don't know, Mark or Beverly, whether you want to add to that.
For us, Tom, it's been very much about trying to, again, take the premise of you know, supporting humans, but actually this is about those students being part of our workforce. And I think the challenge is together we're so much stronger. And so the real challenge for us is how we work alongside students in clinical practice to optimise their ability to be within the team, contribute within the team in their own right as those learners, so that we're able to help position our student contribution in the workplace as being genuinely helpful and not, I hate the word burden of training, but it's about actually how do we reframe that into being we're all here as a team to deliver to our different capabilities to the people in front of us who need our care. So it's just trying to stay in that space together, Tom, accepting that we're all in a state of huge challenge.
Yeah, if I was asked recently a kind of a webinar around students, and I engaged a lot with the student leaders during the pandemic and things, and I think mental health is and the pressure and stress that our students have been under, I think is something we all really need to be cognizant about. And again, this is not here in the Midlands, but we do have examples where students in some ways are kept separate from the main workforce around policy. So I've had a lot of examples where students have come to me saying, well, I've been told I'm a student, so therefore I won't get PPE, or I'm a student, I won't get vaccination, or I've got stress and pressure and I'd like to get access to the psychological services in my trust, but I've been told I'm a student, so therefore don't account or claim. So these are rare examples, of course, because I know that the majority of students do get all of this support and help. But as Bev rightly pointed out, it's making them feel part of the investment in them as an individual, as part of the workforce, because they will one day this year turn from being one of our students into one of our staff nurses, or an OT, or a physio, or an ODP, or a paramedic, and they will remember how valued they were during their training and how that relates to what organisation they choose to go into post. So there's a kind of real focus, because I think there's a real need for that, but I just think there's a really important critical nature of them being seen as part of their long-term career plan into either the health service or social care.
Lovely, thank you very much. And another question that was submitted before was around how do we develop sustainable non-NHS placements? And I know our AHP colleagues are actually really good at doing this, and you do have quite a lot of non-NHS placements, and I think it's something that certainly as a region we're reaching out, and I'm not going to call it social care or care homes anymore. I'm going to be calling it nurse-led services within the social care setting, because I think that seems to land more. But Bev, I don't know whether you've got any words of wisdom how you as AHPs, you do seem to reach out much better than we do within nursing and midwifery into this space.
Thanks, Jackie. I think that the challenge is that so much of our placement capacity is not in mainstream NHS services, so we have no choice, Jackie. We have to. Yeah. The key behind all invention, isn't it? Really, the need. So therefore, I think the issue for us is that actually also that's where placement tariff becomes quite useful, although it's not a huge amount of money. It does mean that moves, and quite often our independent and private sector providers see more of it than our NHS colleagues do. So actually there's quite a useful tool in enabling people to take students, but also some of the ethos is that a lot of our non-NHS services really value our students for keeping them feeling part of the whole and staying connected. So from a sort of a mindset perspective, Jackie, I think we're fortunate that our colleagues really do stay, and this is not a comparison, this is a statement of fact in our world. And if you look at our prosthetic and orthotic services, the vast majority of them are NHS commissioned private sector services. So to get any prosthetist or orthotist out into service, we are dependent upon private sector colleagues to do so. The challenge for us is making sure that we are able to, as I say, stay creative in that space. And for us, I put in the chat box earlier, the AHP faculties, which are a system-facing construct that we are creating. It's a virtual construct, but it enables us to have conversations across a system and across a place, which again, Jackie, for us will continue to open up a lot of those opportunities, because we're often working with very small critical mass of staff, when I say students, and often very, very little organisational capacity. So hopefully for us, that faculty structure will give us far more ability to